welcome to today's art history lesson. Today we're going to be looking kind of at a snapshot of some art from Japan. We're not really, there was so much to fit into one presentation, so I've just picked a few different things. So you might recognise this image. This image is going to feature later. We'll learn about that a bit more. And can I just apologise for any background noise? There's lots of roadworks happening and nowhere is quiet, so we'll just need to see what we can do. So I'm just going to start by going kind of a brief overview of some of the influences on art in Japan and what's kind of crafted their aesthetic, because obviously it's very different from what we're used to in Western art. So some of the influences on Japanese arts, and that's kind of art and decorative art, crafts, is religion, much like it is in the West. Particularly Buddhism, which came from both China and Korea. And then later Zen Buddhism, and kind of the aesthetics of those religions informed a lot of how their art developed, and also the Shinto religion as well, which was the first religion of Japan. Also big influences from China, specifically the Tang industry, the Tang dynasty of China, which was kind of one of the big prolific periods in their history. Japan was just like, right, we got to get some of that, they're doing really well, let's emulate that. And then again, Korea, because there was lots of migration from Korea, and obviously people brought their aesthetic traditions with them. So we've kind of got a wee selection of some pictures there. So we've got some illustrations from the different types of Buddhism, some lovely ink painting here from China, and we've got a lady down here who's getting ready to perform the tea ceremony, which is obviously a really big part of Japanese culture, and kind of the philosophies and ideas in the tea ceremony influence a lot of the art. We've also got a Shinto shrine here, and two, again, lovely big sculptures of Buddhist deities. So they're pretty cool. So that's kind of a bit of background, and then we're going to move on to looking at our first type of art. So this is kind of some early, well, it's not that early, but it's a long tradition. So this is some silk painting, and this is by Maruyama Ushio from 1781. So it is fairly recent. But the thing that's about this is that this is kind of heavily inspired by Chinese silk painting, and you can tell this because it is mostly in black and white. It is just using the natural ink colours, which was a kind of a big thing from Chinese scholarly painting that we'll learn about next week. Maybe we should have done China first, actually, if China influenced Japan. I'm only just thinking of that. Oh well, hindsight's 2020, isn't it? So the thing to remember is, much like in the West, where it would have been kind of people in religious institutions or connected to royalty or people with lots of money, not everyone is making art. So there's lots of kind of little clusters of artisans who are trained and have a very continuous tradition, and you would learn from your master, and then there would be different schools set up. That's much how the art is developing for most of the history. So these are, Maruyama Ushio scrolls are very famous, and he's particularly doing lots of motifs of these dragons and tigers and kind of swirling mist. I think they're really nice. So some of these are screens. This one is a screen, and this one is a scroll. So it's just different ways of having decoration up in your house. And then later, as things develop and change, Japanese artists started to introduce more bold colour into their scrolls, as you can see here with this gorgeous tiger. And that's what starts to separate it apart from the Chinese art. Because Chinese art kind of went from super colourful to this black and white, and then Japanese art was like, oh, nice black and white, let's add some colour to that. So kind of moving in opposite directions. My favourite part about this scroll here is these gorgeous lichens that are on this tree. I think they're really cool. Just look at that detail, that's fabulous. And silk is a really tricky surface to paint on, and there's definitely a technique to doing it and to getting those colours to stay where you want them to stay and for them to stay bright and vivid. And I put a video in the email we're going to send out after this about that. It's too detailed to go into today, but I just think it's really interesting if that's something you want to look into yourself. Yeah, really fierce looking tiger. So we're going to have a look at the Kano school of painting, of which Maruyama Oko was kind of adjacent. And the Kano school is called the Kano school because it was essentially done by the Kano family, who, because a lot of these workshops, you know, it was passed father, son, very patriarchal. So it was the most dominant school of painting until 1886, when Japan was forced to open to the West during the Meiji period. So Japan was closed to the West for a very long time. They didn't let anybody in. They just kind of kept themselves to themselves. They didn't want to trade with you. They didn't want anything else until essentially the West was like, nah, come on. And they essentially forced them. So, as we said earlier, the school began by reflecting the influence of Chinese painting, but then developed brightly coloured and firmly outlined. Everything's got a very bold outline for large panels, decorating castles of nobility. So these are for rich people's nice houses, and they reflect distinctively Japanese traditions. So they're not doing the same subjects as China because they're painting a different country. So they're taking influences from their own culture, their own landscape, and painting different things. So this is a lovely one. I love this kind of semi-golden background, and what I think is really nice is the way they've painted the clouds is that they haven't painted the clouds. If you see here, they've painted the sky in between the clouds, so they've painted the negative space. So they filled in the areas where the clouds aren't, and I think that is really, really, really nice, and I really enjoy that. Again, we've got this lovely lichen on this tree, so it's very much about depicting nature. Here's another lovely one. Again, with that gorgeous negative space, lots of this cloud, just leaving some way for the waterways. It's absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, some lovely, lovely flora. So you're getting lots of different birds, lots of different plants and trees. So it's really kind of capturing the landscape as it is, but in this kind of like really pristine form. So it's like, imagine you had the best specimens of all these plants all together. This is a lovely one. So you can see you kind of got this motif of all these lovely bendy trees. That's really quite a theme. It's really nice. And then here we've got one where it's showing palace life. So you've got some people going around. You've got this little monkey on a sleeve there. I've got all these people showing off the richness of their house. So kind of, because you've got to imagine as well that if you're an artist and somebody's like, oh, gonna come and make a screen for my house, they get to say what's on that screen. You're not gonna get to be like, I don't want to paint that. You want their commission, so you're gonna paint what they want. And here is, I really like this one. This is again revisiting that kind of tiger and dragon theme, but you can see it's quite different. That there is a lot more of a graphic quality. There's more outlines. When I say graphic, I mean kind of, I don't say cartoony, but it's more of definitely a drawn style. You're not going to make it look naturalistic. You're going to put outlines around things, because especially from those earlier scrolls, they're imitating the Chinese. It was a lot softer. It was a lot more realism. There's less bold outlines and big lines to represent things, whereas this is a lot more like, nah, we're going to outline this. We're going to make it really bold. I just think it's really nice. Very lovely work. So that was the tradition of kind of the silk painting and the decorating. And now we're going to move on a bit. So before we were talking kind of 1400 to, well, what were we talking? 1400 to 1800, yeah, that was right. Well done, mate. So now we're going to look at 1603 to 1868. And we're looking at a different technique, which is printing. So this is woodblock printing, which was cheap and it was easy to mass produce lots of images for people. And this is from the Edo period, 1603 to 1868. And these were kind of made for the emerging middle class and the merchant class that were kind of coming up at this point, they weren't able to get people to, you know, custom paint beautiful scrolls for their house, but they could fork out a bit and get some lovely paintings to kind of decorate their new home that they're maybe able to spend a bit more time in. And they quite often, the subjects of these prints is kind of bustling city life, the fashion of the day, trends of the day, and also kind of like maybe like stories of events or legends. So these are called ukiyo-e, or a floating world, and they were called floating world, one because they were kind of, it was scenes from the world, but they were movable. They were kind of put in a frame and they were movable. But then kind of later it kind of took on a slightly more kind of derogatory term in that, like, oh, it's painting the fripperies of the day. It's not real life. It's just, you know, your airy-fairy fashion. And they're really nice and colourful. I think they're really nice. So obviously you then get a lot more artists who are able to produce and sell these more. So here's some examples. So these are kind of scenes from daily life. So you've got some ladies working on doing some writing there. That's really nice. And then we've got this lady, she's doing some sewing. Maybe she's fixing some things. And again, it kind of looks like she's floating on a cloud here, which I really like. Just kind of got the sea in the background. And then on this one on the right, I think these ladies are picking, I want to say cotton. I don't know. They're picking something off trees and then they're putting it in a boiling pot of water. And a lot of these kind of the main subject is the people, and the most kind of distinctive thing about the people is their clothes and their hair. And they've kind of all got the same sort of face. They're not really kind of going out the way to make sure that they're different, or you're like, oh, that's Sarah. They're kind of faceless, beautiful ladies in very fine clothes. So there we go. Here's a few more kind of fashion ones. We've got a lady here looking a bit shocked. When I first looked at this, I thought maybe she was getting caught in the rain. I don't know why I thought that. But look at this fabulous big headdress she's got on with all these big blue flowers on, and it matches her dress, which is really cool. What I like about this actually is you can see the grain of the wood block in the background. That's really nice because you are working on a natural material. I've got another lady here. She's got one robe behind her. She's got another robe sitting down. Almost looks like it could be like an early catalogue. She's kind of like, oh, this season's trend. And then last but not least, we've got this lady here painting her eyebrows on. She's looking in the mirror. She's trying to do it very quickly, get her makeup done. I think they're really nice. I think if I was going to have any of these dresses, I think I'd like this lady's one. That one's really cool. And then you've also got ones that are showing kind of like the myths and the legends. So we've got a samurai here. So samurai were kind of the hired hands of the loyal men of the shogun. So because at one point after Japan was unified, you had Imperial Japan, then you had feudal Japan, when it was lots of warring shogunates who had these samurai who would essentially fight. So it was a bit like a bit more of a civil war. So that would be quite recent history at this point. We've also got these guys here, and you see you've got the story written around it. I think that's really nice. That's really cool. So he seems to have caught this guy. He's bundled up. He's going to take him somewhere. Presumably his fate isn't going to be good. Now you've also got this lovely one here of these two warriors fighting. So they've got cool different hair. They seem to be fighting in the snow. Got all these amazing fabrics on. I love this guy's he's got kind of snakes and stuff on his. My money's on this guy. I think he looks like he's doing a good time. But so you've kind of got the visual scene, but then you've also got information about it written around it. It's pretty cool. Obviously, I can't read that, so I don't know what that says. But I'm presuming it's giving you a bit more information about what's happening in the picture. It's just something I think we should do in our illustration, and that's a good idea. So now we're going to talk about perhaps the most famous printmaker from the Edo period, which is Hokusai, who painted this he carved this picture here, which we know as the Great Wave, which is in fact called the Great Under the Wave of Kanagawa, which I didn't know. And I actually learned something really interesting in this. I didn't know that this was produced as essentially a souvenir or like a postcard for Japan's internal tourist market at the time. So a lot of printers like Hokusai would be making things that people could buy because it's a product. And they've got lots of kind of these new middle class people that are going around, they're taking holidays, they're going to go and see and explore their country, and they're wanting things to take home that are relatively cheap and beautiful but able to carry home. So cue all these fantastic printers like Hokusai making essentially fancy postcards, which I think are really cool. So this work, which we know as The Wave, is one of his series called 36 Views of Mount Fuji. So we did 36 views of Mount Fuji from all different sides. We'll look at a few of those later. This is obviously the most famous one. So Mount Fuji's here. This is why it's called Under the Great Wave, because Mount Fuji is under this big wave here. So kind of the main subject here is kind of like the beauty of nature here. We've got this big wave coming up, and it's gonna, looks like it's gonna engulf not only Mount Fuji, but also these little fishing boats down here as well. Kind of there's people in it, but they're secondary to the landscape, which I think is something that's quite common in kind of these beautiful scenes that people would be buying, which I suppose like is a bit like postcards now, to be honest. So Hokusai was just a guy making these essentially tourist prints. But in 1850, when Japan opened up, it was some of his work that was taken and shown in Paris at the 1867 World Exposition that they had, you know, kind of one of these world fairs where they're like, roll up, and look at all this cool stuff. And it was at this point that Japanese prints, and specifically Hokusai, became very popular with Western artists, because people were suddenly able to see things from Japan. Now they were, because you've got to remember they were closed for so long, you maybe get the odd things smuggled out by Dutch traders, but people didn't really know what was going on. So to kind of see this kind of very different art style, people were just like, whoa! And we know that Van Gogh was a big fan of Hokusai as well. Yep, so it's thought that some of his work as well shows Western influence, so perhaps that he got some of these Western landscape engravings that were also smuggled in by Dutch tourists. So although it was closed, there was a little black market, we could get some things. Yeah, so that's Hokusai. What a cool dude. So this is one of his other views of Mount Fuji. This is one of his other kind of quite famous ones. So this is called South Wind, Clear Sky, or also is known as Red Fuji sometimes, because, you know, we like to be very literal. But I love the gradient on this. I think this is really gorgeous. And it's actually quite simple. He's not done a whole load of carving in here. I just think it's a lovely image, isn't it? Simplicity is best. Oh, also, a new thing is that we know it's quite easy to date when Hokusai's prints were made, because just before Japan's fully opening up and after it's opened up, he's able to import this shade of blue, which is Prussian blue, which comes from Prussia, which is kind of Germany. So it's kind of, this is a very new pigment at this time for artists in Japan, which I suppose it's not a new colour because they've had indigo. So indigo is a colour, that really deep blue is something we associate a lot with Japanese textiles. But to be able to produce it this easily and for it to work on woodblock is a fairly new thing. And this is another one. I really like this one. I think this is called Gotenyama Hill. So we've got the view from Gotenyama Hill out to Mount Fuji. And again, you've got this beautiful landscape, but you've also got a wee bit of human interest down the bottom. There's some people doing stuff, some people having a procession, it seems. They've got kind of little kids on their backs. They've got some fans. They're having a good time. It's really nice. My favourite bit of this is this blue gradient here. I think that's really nice, from the deep blue down to the very pale blue, and then contrast with this pale pink. That's very, very nice. I'm a fan. And then last but not least, this isn't one of his views of Fuji, but this is another one. And I just think the way, the perspective on this is really interesting, because obviously it's a waterfall. It's called Amida Waterfall, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure what's actually happening up here. I don't really, it's not a perspective that I can easily read. But I really like it. I think these lines are gorgeous. I suppose maybe it's kind of a flattening of the whole thing, so you can kind of see the top of the waterfall and the water coming down and the sides all at once. But yep, again, I just think it's really nice. I haven't got much input on these, I just think they're cool. So now we're kind of moving forward a bit in time, and we're going to look at Sugiharu Fujita, who is a Japanese artist who works in Paris in the Roaring Twenties, and he's kind of one of these emblems of people that kind of links the Eastern and Western style and combined them really successfully. So he was born in 1886 and he lived until 1968. So here he is. This is kind of classic Fujita. Round specs, bowl cut cat. That is his look. That is how you identify him. And I think actually it's quite trendy for today. Yeah. So this is one of his early works, and this is called Young Couple. He did this in 1917. So this is where you can kind of see him starting to kind of combine the East and the West. So he's got kind of quite a recognisable landscape here. We've got kind of the water, we've got them sitting on the land, which is the negative space, it's the colour of the canvas. It's got these kind of lovely ducks surrounding it. Just the way it's laid out is quite Japanese. But we've got this couple. We're drawn in, again, quite an Asian way, but the clothing and the hair is very, very Western. So he's kind of depicting a Western subject in an Eastern way, you could say. So I'm getting all that. I don't want to just keep saying Japanese over and over again, but see how we go. Yeah, I think that's really nice. I love the contrast of the blue and this kind of peachy colour. And that's really nice. I'm not really sure why the goats are here, but, you know. So this is a picture of Fujita. And so he studied he studied Western art in Japan for a few years, and then he moved to Paris when he was 27 to study at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris for 2 to 3 years. And when he finished his studies in Paris, he essentially contacted his dad and was like, right, Dad, I'm not coming back, and please consider me dead until I am a famous artist. So it's like, you will see me again when I am successful, and if not, you will never see me. So, you know, quite dramatic, you could say. Definitely, it's not words I can ever imagine myself saying. Very confident though, I suppose. Maybe he's just assuming he's going to do it. Good on him. So he lived in Montparnasse in Paris, and he became good friends with Modigliani and Picasso. And I suppose he was quite well connected, because I can imagine people at the time, they've seen the Grand Exposition, people are interested in Japanese art, they've seen it, they love it, and then they're like, oh, a Japanese artist, hello, can you teach me things? So I imagine he was quite popular. And he worked between Japan and France for the rest of his life, but he did his most famous work between 1913 and 1931. So he worked in Paris and he went back to Japan for a bit. During the Second World War, he kind of had to stay there because he couldn't come back. And then after that, he moved back to Paris and converted to Catholicism, built a church, and started working in a more magical, realist way up until his death. We're going to focus on his most famous period of work, which happened between 1913 and 1931. So he did kind of 3 key subjects. So the first one we're going to look at is portraits. He did lots of beautiful portraits of beautiful ladies, as they do in Paris at this time. That seems to be what all the artists were up to. So he did quite a lot of kind of quite tasteful nudes that I haven't put in here. I've kind of focused on the portraits. But he kind of got known for this white on white technique, and that's kind of what people were like, yes, Fujita, yes, I love it. As you can see here, it's kind of like painting these quite ethereal, soft females, onto this white, this kind of creamy background, so they're fading in and out. And he did loads of these. This is kind of what he made his fame for. And this woman here is Kiki de Montparnasse, and she was a famous showgirl who was a model for many famous artists as well. And unfortunately, kind of once she lost her youth and her beauty, they didn't paint her so much, and then she died unfortunately, kind of relatively unknown. But in her heyday, she was a muse. She was Montparnasse. She was part of that community. She was a big part of the culture and what was happening there. So you can see he's kind of using these, kind of looks like those first silk paintings we looked at. There's a softness there, but he's also still using kind of the very bold outlines. So he's arrived in Paris and he's painting these Parisian subjects, but he's using the techniques that he knows. He's using the visual language that he knows, and then people are like, yes, this is great, I haven't seen this before. I particularly like this one. I think her eyes are very striking. I really think she's looking very mysterious. And here's another two when he kind of started to use a bit more colour, which again are still very interesting. And I think it's always the eyes that are very arresting in Fujita's work. So this is kind of young lady in cape, and this is a portrait of his wife, I believe. So these are both in kind of 1932, so they're a bit after his heyday. And he's kind of moving towards that magical realism where he's beginning to use the colour. But I still think they're lovely pieces of work. And the composition, the way they're laid out on the page, is very arresting. Second subject that he's very famous for is cats. He kept a number of cats, as you saw from his photograph. He lived with them, and he did lovely paintings of them. So I really like this picture of the cat with the scissors, because it makes it look like him with his little round specks. That's lovely. And then you can just tell from these that he really, really likes cats, because I think he paints them in a really affectionate way. They seem to always be having like a nice time, a nice snooze, or like a nice cuddle, or they're up to mischief, as cats quite often are. And again, he's painting them in this kind of white on white style, which is really nice. Then we've also got the woodcut here, which is really nice as well. And he's got a lovely way of capturing the fur, which, as we all know, drawing fur is very hard. So hats off to Fujita, he was a master. And then his last subject, which I think is actually my favourite, is his self-portraits. He did lots of paintings of himself in his studio. And I think these are probably, well, they're the ones that I find the most interesting, because one, you can really capture his character. Two, always got a cat with him. Three, you can see him alongside his work, which I always think is quite interesting when artists paint themselves with their work, so it gets a bit meta because they're painting work that they've already painted. And then fourthly, so many reasons. Fourthly is because of the perspective in these images. They're not, the space isn't very deep, they're very flat. Everything's kind of on the one plane, and in that sense it's kind of very inspired by that Asian art tradition. It is in, he's not trying to get the perfect 3-point perspective, he's kind of flattened it all. And I really like it. I especially like the way he paints his hair and his glasses and his cats. And also in this one here, he's not bothered to clean up his studio. He's got his pipe, he's got a wee knife, he's got his matches, he's got his ashtray. He's kept it all very real. He's not trying to pretend he's very tidy. I also think his earring makes him look very piratey, which I very like. There we go. So I think this is my favourite one. Here he is with his cats. I think it's also his belt that makes him look piratey. Yeah, so here he is with his work, his folders, his kind of smoking debris, his easel, and his table that he works at with his ink. And I just think it's a very nice kind of summary of, you can get really a sense of who he is here, which I really like. So now we're going to move on to Kawakami Sumio, who was alive from 1895 to 1917. So Kawakami was fascinated by the amusing encounters and bizarre misunderstandings that had occurred when the first foreigners arrived in Japan, and this interest is reflected in a great many of his prints. He was a self-taught artist in the art of Yokohama-e, which I'm going to go on to explain exactly what Yokohama-e is in the next slide. But these are woodblock prints again, but they're quite different from the woodblock prints from the Edo period we were looking at. They're a lot chunkier. The colouring is a lot less delicate. It looks like they're hand-coloured later on, so the colour is added on top of the print. There's a lot less detail. It's a lot more, it's not a lot more stylized, it's stylized in a different way. So this one is called Arrival of Foreigners from the South. This one is called, oh no, sorry, it's Arrival of Portuguese Ship. And this one is called Three Portuguese. So this is kind of a Japanese delegation meeting some traders who have come from the West. And so they've got so he's kind of showing the difference between their dress. So you've kind of got all these lovely robes here, and then you've got these very ornate capes. They've got ruffs, they've got very elaborate hats. They've got this big, quite ostentatious ship. They've got all these goods they want to come and trade. They've got clocks. They've got these kind of vases here. They look like German Bellarmine vases. They've got carpets. So he's kind of capturing what this looks like. So these are kind of two of his more collected prints. These are in a museum in Chicago. Oh, I'm running low on battery. So Yokohama-e. What is Yokohama-e? So it's a genre of print showing Western visitors, fashions, crafts, and technology. So it's kind of capturing what's happening when Japan opens up. So until 1853, Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world. Japan was a forbidden country for foreigners, and no Japanese were allowed to leave Japan. Pretty draconian. The one exception were Dutch traders represented in the East India Trading Company. Gosh, they get everywhere, don't they? And they could only trade at one small location. So there was one kind of, essentially a gate where they could drop stuff off and pick stuff up, and that was it. They weren't allowed any further. So these prints, these Yokohama-e, began with the opening of Japan in 1851 and the beginning of the Meiji era in 1868. Because kind of Japan was forced to open in 1854, and then in 1868 they were like, we're opening, it was our decision. Yeah. Damn you, Western forces. So Japanese people had never seen foreigners before, nor Western technical achievements. I would say I took this from Wikipedia. Like locomotives or iron ships. So Yokohama met the public demand for images of foreigners and Western style ships, leisure and entertainment. And this was especially important because during the first years, foreigners weren't allowed to travel more than 25 miles outside of where they docked. And this was to protect them from being kind of attacked, because there were still some kind of samurai on the loose who may attack them. So you've got to imagine if you've been living in Japan for a long time and there's this big event and all of a sudden you can get all this stuff you haven't been allowed before, but maybe you're not super rich and you can't afford it. You'd be hungry for these images of what that thing is. It's a bit like if aliens arrived, we'd all want to know what the aliens look like. We'd want to know what they're doing, what are they up to, and these prints kind of filled that hole. So here's a few examples that are not from the artist we're looking at, of kind of people capturing these things and these styles that people hadn't seen before. So we've got kind of a Western man in a horse and cart with his dog and this big fancy ship. And then we've got a lady in kind of, I don't know what this period is, this Victorian or Edwardian dress, looking very fancy on a horse, looking really warm. She's got her bonnet on. Yeah, and then again, we've got kind of the ladies in their kind of very, very modest fashion, all their big skirts and their hoops and their layers. Yeah, so that's Yokohama-e. So you can, just to give you a bit of the context of where these artworks are coming out of. So this is one of the artists we're looking at. So this one is called Westerners in Japanese Dress. So he's kind of got these first visitors coming over, you know, they're trying on nice robes. They're like, oh, these are really comfy. I don't have to wear my breeches. This is fabulous. And then he's got this other one here, which is Japanese people in Western dress. You know, they're trying on the breeches and the cravats and all this. I don't know why you'd want to, because I imagine Western dress in this period being really uncomfortable. He's kind of capturing this kind of like melange of cultures, this mixing that's happening. And then he also contributed to this series made from 1929 to 1931 called Scenes of Lost Tokyo, or Recollections of Tokyo, or Views of New Tokyo. There's many ways to kind of interpret this title. These prints were made by kind of a collective of folk, so lots of people chipped in their art, and then they produced a series. And the target audience for these was kind of occupying forces, and they were published over 4 years to remember aspects of Tokyo that had been lost or changed, kind of one due to this kind of new influence of the West, but also because there was a really bad earthquake and a huge fire in Tokyo in 1923 that destroyed a lot of the city. So it's kind of these artists kind of being like, no, we're going to remember what this time was like because we recognise that it's not going to be around forever. So this one is called Night in Ginza. So Ginza is an area of Tokyo, and I just think the colour in this is stunning. This really bright pink with these kind of stripes of blue through the cloud. It almost looks like an Edvard Munch, and I just love how it's not too pristine. We're not entirely sure exactly what all these shapes are. That's really nice. And he's got this one, which is Chrysanthemum Show. So this is people looking at a nice display of flowers. So these big chrysanthemums are these huge, big flowers with many, many petals, and they're very ornate and huge, very, very beautiful. People go and look at them. Apparently, looks really nice. We've also got inside the grand department store, so it's kind of capturing kind of the bustling shoppers and the people looking around and buying all their nice things. And then we've also got grand military parade. So you've kind of got this show of military force here. And again, I love this liney background. I think that's really, really effective. That's lovely, and it really focuses your attention on kind of the key details where he's put them. So now we're going to move on. We're going to look at something quite different here. So this is, well, what do you think this is? That's the question. How would you think he'd make this painting? What materials is it using? How would you make these marks? This is an action painting, and it's made by punching by this dude here. So here he is making one of these works. This is Ushio Shonihara, and he was born in 1932. He's still working today. And he was originally trained in oil painting, and then he began making junk art using found objects when he was a young dude. He was putting on independent exhibitions with his pals in his young days. And he was quite widely celebrated for this. And then he moved to New York and continued kind of making these works using kind of discarded everyday objects. But in 1960 and 61, he began making these action paintings. So you can see him doing it here. And what he would do is he would dip boxing gloves in sumi ink, which is kind of it's the traditional ink used for ink painting, and attacking the canvas. And because action painting is quite a big thing at this time, if you think we've had Jackson Pollock and all this sort of stuff happening, so this is kind of him making his mark on that. So he only did this briefly, and then he actually began again in 2013 because people love it. So here he is, a much older man now, doing this in 2013. So here he is, pew pew, looking really cool. Yeah, so he the way he thinks about these paintings is kind of like it's a bit like abstract art. You can kind of look in it and see what you imagine, and you can kind of, a bit like a Rorschach test. You kind of, what you see is unique to you, and it's always changing. I think he uses quite nice colours. But I thought this was quite a nice move into the 20th century. We're moving away from kind of wood blocks and stuff, and we're looking at what's happening kind of now. So this piece here is called Pumpkin Flowers by Ushio Shonihara. But in 1965, after he'd been doing these action works, he became more influenced by pop art. And he was also looking back at these prints from the Edo period. So those are the ones that we looked at with Hokusai, and these ones that were made for the new merchants. And he made this series called Oiran, and an Oiran was a high-class courtesan traditionally depicted in woodblock prints, specifically in the Edo period. So it's these beautiful ladies in their lovely fashion. And he kind of reinvented this in this pop way. And he decided that he was going to take this idea of the beautiful courtesan, and he is going to paint her on aluminium sheeting using car paint and fluorescent paint, and it's going to be rough, and it's going to be modern, and it's going to be messy and garish and really bright. So his kind of idea behind depicting these traditional subjects in this way was to kind of push the box of Japanese culture, which can be quite restrained and kind of value grace and beauty, and he wanted it to be louder and a bit less polite, and kind of look at things that are less traditionally beautiful. Because I still think these colours are beautiful, but they're maybe not as kind of sedated and refined. They're beautiful in a very different way. Yeah, so that's the thinking behind these paintings, and he kind of worked along this kind of idea for a while, using spray paints and stencils and often quite industrial materials. So these are really, really big. They're maybe about the size of me. And this is one of his really big ones, and this is called Doll Festival from 1966. And this painting is taller than him, and it's maybe about 3 or 4 meters wide, and it's all done with these big spray painted stencils. So he's kind of taking those traditional themes, and he's bringing them into the 20th century using this pop art style. And he's kept them faceless, which I think is quite interesting. So he's kind of being unapologetically Japanese in New York at this point. I love this. My main section I love is this green and red bit. I think that's really nice. So now we're going to move on to kind of a bit more of an art movement that's happening at the moment, and this is called the super flat. So super flat is a postmodern art movement, so that means it's now essentially postmodern. We're no longer in the modern period, we're now doing contemporary art, and it was founded by the artist Takeshi Murakami, and it is very influenced by manga and anime, because he was really into manga and anime when he was a kid. So manga and anime is kind of Japanese cartoons, animations, and generally that drawing style. It's also very influenced by the concept of kawaii, which is kind of, in a simple way, it's kind of a word for extreme cuteness. It's very cute, it's very sweet, it's extremely positive. If you can think of like a super excitable toy that is alive and always bouncing around, that would be kind of very kawaii. So the name refers to the various flattened forms in Japanese graphic art. So that's kind of a long tradition right back to that early silk painting, through to the wood blocks, and through to kind of the media of now. And it's a double-edged thing. So not only is it referring to the flatness of the way things are painted, but in this, they're also referring to the shallow emptiness of Japanese consumer culture. Because if you think about it, Japan was occupied by America after the Second World War, and America brought a lot of American influence, a lot of kind of mass production, a lot of interest in kind of disposable things, a kind of a fast capitalist idea, I suppose. I hadn't thought about how I was going to word that, but kind of that bold, bright idea of the 50s, everything's bright, everything, you can have everything now, is disposable. Yeah. I think, yeah. So American consumer culture and Japanese consumer culture are quite interlinked as well. So it's not only the shallow emptiness of the Japanese culture, it's kind of what has also been brought from America. So here he is. Oh, it's pretty bright. That's pretty bright. There he is. There he is, covered in his own work. He doesn't look like he's very happy, does he? So this is Takeshi Murakami, and he was born in 1962. He was the founder of the super flat movement, and he works in fine art media, painting, sculpture, so kind of fine art, valuable things, as well as commercial media such as fashion, merchandise, and animation. And he is known for blurring the lines between high and low art. Initially, he studied as an animator, and then he did a PhD in Nihonga, which is the traditional style of Japanese painting. So you've got to remember, when you're looking at these works, he is a very classically trained artist. He could go and he could do all that other stuff we just looked at, but he's not. He's chosen to do this sort of thing. A bit like Picasso last week. He could do all the perfectly painted stuff, so he went his own way and did these different things. So Murakami was dissatisfied with the state of contemporary art in Japan, believing it to be a deep appropriation of Western trends. So he was a bit like, why are we trying to do something that you could do in America? We're not America. We're Japan. We can do something with our culture. And a lot of his early work was done in the spirit of social criticism and satire, which is probably where that criticism of the consumer culture comes from. All right, so let's have a wee look at some of his work. So this one here is called Summer Vapor Trails. There we go. So we've got that kind of lovely blue sky background with some very happy cartoon flowers in the front. And yes, you look at it, it's very flat. Nothing looks particularly 3D. Nothing's meant to look 3D. It's very cartoony. There's no kind of shading in there, no depth of fields. So this is called Summer Vapor Trails. And these flowers are a theme in his work, as you'll see. This next piece is called Flowers Blooming. And they definitely are. There's lots of them everywhere. So this is kind of the main theme of his work, I'd say, is these kind of like happy flowers that are kind of so happy they're a bit scary. And he's got lots and lots of them with lots of different titles. Yeah, lots of very bright colour in there. This one is called Everything is Meeting. I don't know why I've written melting there. Everything is meeting. So again, he's got all these flowers, and then he's got these two characters who are kind of a recurring theme in his work as well. They're kind of like little mascot-y cartoon character type things combined with the flowers. And then, as you can see in the background, it's got that kind of like gold paper negative space that we recognise from some of those Kano school paintings from earlier on. And then we've got this one, just getting slowly more dystopian. So this one is New Day, Kai Kai and Kiki, Faces All Over. So that's the names of these two characters. So again, you've got all the flowers looking very happy. You've got the cartoon characters looking a bit less happy. They're all kind of got these very distorted, exaggerated expressions that aren't necessarily happy. So everything's really kind of at an extreme. You've got the super happy flowers, super colourful cartoon characters with these very distorted expressions. Yeah, and then we're going to get a bit darker again. This one is called Self-Portrait of the Manifold Worries of a Manifoldly Distressed Artist. So lots and lots of worries for a very distressed artist. So there you go again. He's kind of got these self-portrait in this cartoony fashion. There's lots of them. He's got these kind of thought bubbles around, again with very exaggerated expressions, and kind of the loads and loads and loads of these super happy flowers. It must be quite an overwhelming situation to be in, and it's still very flat, very cartoony. And then finally, I thought we'd kind of ramp up to the most dark ones. So these are kind of a bit more recent. So this one on the left is called Dark Matter. So you can see it's still using those flowers, but this is a traditional pattern of a chrysanthemum, which is quite often a motif in Japanese art. And it's kind of got these patterns in the background as well. So it's kind of a very traditional subject, but represented in this very modern and quite dark way. It definitely, you can tell it looks like it's been done on a computer. Kind of got this kind of this is called a halftone, these dots. It's kind of a printing effect. Yeah, it doesn't look happy. It's pretty, but it doesn't look happy. And then probably the darkest one that I've included here, this is called The Octopus Eats Its Own Leg, which is apparently something that octopuses do when they're very bored and depressed, is they'll eat their own legs, which is really horrible. I hope there's no octopuses feeling like that at the moment. Yeah, so you've kind of got this, again, it looks like kind of a hyper animated character. It's very exaggerated. It's kind of so happy and colourful. It's not happy and colourful anymore, if that makes sense. It's looking, maybe it's like it's having a bit of a distressed time. Yeah, so that's his work. There we go. That's contemporary art in Japan right now. So this is the next artist we're going to look at here, and this is Yoshimoto Nara, and this series is called No Fun in the Floating World. And this is where he's adapted a series of those ukiyo-e prints, which are the floating world prints. So he's taken some copies of some of them and he's put his own work on top. So here's a selection of them, and then I've got some of them in big. So this one is called No Fun. So we've got one of these lovely ladies in her fancy costume, and he's added in his own section. So apparently he's quite inspired by album covers, because there are no kind of museums or anything where he grew up, and he consumed a lot of his visual culture through album covers, CD covers of like folk people, and also a lot of punk bands. And he's made quite a few album covers for people now, so he's very into that kind of punk aesthetic. As you can see by this one here, he's made a Japanese guy into, he's kind of punkified him. He's given them these lovely spikes. It's done in a really scrawly manner, probably with a perme. Looks like a bit of a acrylic paint pen as well. So he's just kind of putting his own twist on these things as well. And then this is my favourite one. So he's kind of got this, he's kind of kept the lovely hair of this lady, but he's kind of made it into this little cartoon person who's reading a scroll saying, "You're nobody's fool." And on the top it says "No nukes," because obviously Japan has a nuclear past, and it also has a lot of nuclear power plants at the moment. And this was done in 1998, this series. I just think they're quite cool. They're pretty fun. But this is kind of an early stage of his work, and kind of these kind of naughty cartoon children are a theme that he's carried forward. So this is one of his most famous pieces, and this is called Cosmic Girl, Eyes Open, Eyes Shut, and this is from 2008. And these are really large oil paintings. They're really, really, really big, sort of quite a monumental scale. And this is quite a typical piece for this artist, Yoshimoto Nara. He does these kind of very cute, small, I think they're meant to be children, and they often have quite a direct and confrontational gaze, and they're often kind of, you feel like they're really looking at you and they're trying to communicate something. And again, you've got this lovely pale background, and their faces are quite like no masks. So no masks were a kind of mask used in no theatre, which was a very traditional Japanese form of theatre, and where they use these masks that look quite a lot like these faces. So Yoshimoto Nara was born in 1959. He had his first success in Japan in the 90s when Japan had a big pop art trend. They had the kind of own pop art movement at that point. And he does deceptively simple images. They look quite simple, but kind of they're not, like, their simplicity is complex, if that makes sense. So they're most well known for, and repeated subject is kind of young girls with piercing eyes, like this one staring at you here. It's inspired by his own very independent childhood. He was often kind of allowed to kind of just kick about and do what he wanted. Rock music, punk culture, and the kind of the contrast between dark and light, and he's quite interested in kind of the dark side of that cartoon kawaii culture that we talked about with the last artist. And his paintings are really large. So this painting is quite simple. There's not a lot going on. Just kind of girl, she's staring at you. But the title kind of changes it a little bit. So the title is called Knife Behind Back. So the title itself is quite threatening. And once you hear the title, it kind of changes the way you look at the picture. Even though it's just a picture and it's just a title, you don't know what she has behind her back. And she is quite small, so she probably doesn't have a knife. if that makes sense. There's a kind of a duality there, like the title implies it's threatening, but also it's a little girl, it's not threatening. And then also his kind of more recent works have kind of got a strong anti-war and anti-nuclear slant. So these two pieces are called After the Acid Rain, Daytime and Nighttime. So it's kind of about the acid rain that comes down after nuclear events, be that the bombing of Hiroshima or the explosion in Fukushima, because Japan has had a number of nuclear tragedies happen, so some of his work does reference that. And again, you kind of got this small, quite innocent figure. It's kind of within this kind of swampy landscape. Again, there's not too much detail in the background, but there's just enough detail that you can kind of surmise what's going on. There's kind of this extreme lightness in the way it's painted, but hinting at something very dark. And then there's another two here. So this one here is called Agent Orange, which was a chemical weapon used in the Vietnam War to horrible, horrible effect. And then we've also got this one here called Deeper Than a Puddle. And I really like this. See, this is actually a collaborative piece with another artist, and I really like the way they've painted the water. I think that's really, really nice. Yeah, so again, they've kind of gone for these big, smooth surfaces with very little, very soft detail. It's really nice. Yeah, so that's the artists we're going to look at today, that we've kind of ended on the super flat movement. We've gone all the way from the Kano school through to super flat. Thanks for watching along today, guys. Sorry for the poor sound quality. They need to stop doing roadworks outside my flat. I hope that was interesting. Next week we are having a look at some Chinese art. So come along for that. Thank you and have a lovely week.